Okay, I'll stop you right there. You said you want to put a trigger warning on a video. Okay, now I'll just say this straight up. Anyone who ever puts a trigger warning on anything deserves to be castrated and shot in the chest immediately, because trigger warnings are the biggest joke and piece of shit in our society's existence. Trigger warnings, like anything could be triggering to someone. I was just reading this post and this whole story about this girl who was on Tumblr, and she literally raged at this other user who she was harassing for posting pictures of food because she was anorexic, and those pictures of food were triggering to her. So pictures of food can be triggering. You don't know? You damn well should know. My name is Rag Reynolds, and today I'd like to talk about trigger warnings. Now, the clip you just saw was from a video back in 2014, early 2014 I made that video. And the argument I made back then, although there was violence in it, and obviously it's way over the top, I don't genuinely think that people should be castrated and shot in the chest for using trigger warnings. But the points I made still stand true today. I mean, it's very important to realise that the very nature of trigger warnings, the whole point of it is you put a trigger warning on a piece of information, on a video, on a book, on anything, to inform readers or content consumers that there might be content coming up that could potentially be triggering to them. Now, the main idea of this, I'm not too opposed to. I can understand there's graphic sex in this movie before a movie, because, okay, maybe you just don't want to see graphic sex in the movie. Maybe if it tells you that there's graphic rape coming up, you just don't want to see that. So I can completely understand that. Same goes for swearing if you don't want your kids to hear swearing and lots of stuff like that. But the point we're at today in society, we've let this go on far too much. It's too far escalated. There are people demanding that other people put trigger warnings on pictures of their food, on pictures of their pets. Dogs trigger me. You should put a trigger warning on your picture of your dog. It's like, what? Seriously? There's also this whole thing, and people are saying trigger warning Islamophobia. But all that means is that someone's disagreeing with them and saying that Islam isn't a religion of peace, for example. Or trigger warning anti-feminism. It's because someone disagrees with them on feminism. It's being used largely as a way to try and disassociate and distance people from opposing views. They're making out as if opposing views are hate speech, as opposing views are triggering. There's this pattern emerging of this, and we can see it all over the world, all over social media, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. Safe spaces are a great example of this. There are college campuses all over America setting up safe spaces in their colleges. Safe spaces. You go to college and it's supposed to be a place you go to challenge your ideas, to learn new things. And these people are going and hiding in safe spaces when speakers like Ben Shapiro or Milo Yiannopoulos come to speak at their college. Like, these are the times, the places that you're supposed to be challenging yourself, listening to opposing ideas, even if those ideas are harmful to you, in your opinion. This is the best time to be hearing these opposing views, but instead these people put trigger warnings on it and set up safe spaces and run away. So let's say you have someone suffering from anorexia, or a recovering alcoholic, or something like that. And you put a trigger warning on a post and it's trigger warning anorexia, trigger warning alcohol, something like that. Well, at first, yes, there are certainly circumstances in which this can be helpful. But for the most part, this sort of thing actually does these people more harm than it does them good. You see, if something's happened to you or you're recovering from something, you can't just hide from it for the rest of your life. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. You can't expect everyone else to hide it from you. If you've been in a car crash, say, and maybe someone died in your car crash, you can't suddenly just avoid looking at cars for the rest of your life. You can't expect everyone to put trigger warnings on things. Maybe you're surrounding yourself with a group of friends. This group of friends always put trigger warning car accident, whatever. But then suddenly one day you stumble across a post after years of this happening, and you stumble across a post and it's the first time you've seen it and someone hasn't put a trigger warning on it, and you see that car crash. That's going to devastate you because you're completely sensitive to it. Trigger warnings keep people sensitive. They keep people from entering the real world and from seeing real things. People need to be desensitized to tragedies. People need to hear about these things. If you don't know these things are going on, you stay in this little box. As soon as you break out of that box, you're not going to be able to function. You're not going to be able to live in the real world. And that's why there's an issue with colleges setting up safe spaces, because these students are on colleges, someone comes in they don't agree with, they run to their safe space, they put up the trigger warnings, and they cover their ears and go blah 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 blah. But then they finish college, they go out into the real world, they get a job, they do whatever, and suddenly someone says something they disagree with, and they've no reaction other than ree. They can't do anything. Like what? They're not equipped to deal with society. They're not equipped to deal with life. And it's the same with people who have gone through things. At first, yes, there are certainly circumstances, as I said, where trigger warnings can help. They can help to a certain extent. But it can't be a consistent thing. And there has to be a point where they go away. It can't be long. It has to be maybe as soon as the disaster strikes or tragedy strikes, for a week or two, maybe a month. You maybe comfort them, you don't expose them to that sort of thing, but after that, after the grieving period is over, you need to expose people to this stuff. That's the only way to desensitize them from the tragedy, to stop them having breakdowns, and to keep them moving on in life. And I'm not just saying all this as an uneducated opinion. I have family in the mental health business I've spoken to in depth about this issue, and most of my opinions on this issue have come from them. And these are people who deal with people who have been through tragedies, people who know exactly when stuff like trigger warnings and content block, that sort of thing, when it's appropriate and when it's not. And the last thing I would like to cover is the fact that trigger warnings are actually triggering in and of themselves. I mean, I'm not even joking here. For example, say you have someone who's so sensitive that the mere mention of rape is going to make them have a breakdown. They're going to fall apart and cry, okay? Well, you saying trigger warning, there is rape in this post, that's mentioning rape. You are triggering them with your trigger warning. Your trigger warning isn't helping anything. It's doing the exact same as it would if this person read the post. Sure, you could argue that, well, maybe they would have read something more graphic in the post. Okay, but I'm sure they would stop as soon as they read the first mention of rape. Your trigger warnings are oftentimes triggering to people. If you say trigger warning food or trigger warning anorexia, then someone who's set off by the mere mentions of those words are going to be set off by your trigger warning, because your trigger warning has to mention it. You can't just say the word trigger warning and leave it, because then people don't know what could trigger them. I could be triggered by anorexia, whereas someone else could be triggered by rape, okay? And if you just say trigger warning, how are we supposed to know who it's intended for? So you can't just say trigger warning. You have to either say trigger warning anorexia or trigger warning rape, or both. And if you say those things, that's the mention of the word. And if we're set off by the mention of the word, then the trigger warning is going to trigger us. The trigger warning is triggering. This has been very much a rambly video, but I hope, whether you agreed or disagreed with me, that my insight was at least interesting or thought-provoking to some extent. Let me know what your thoughts are on this subject in the comments down below. If you liked the video, hit like, and if you're new here, hit subscribe. And until next time, my name is Rag Reynolds, and you're welcome, society.